for joining us. For those of you that may be new to this event, this is a ongoing monthly event that the Northwest Natural Resource Group hosts. Every month we focus on a little different topic relating to small woodlands management or ecologically based forest management. And we usually just kind of make up the topics as we go along. So, if there is a subject that any of you would like us to cover and dive into, we'd be happy to consider it. The usual format for these evenings is we have usually about a half hour presentation or so. And then for the second half hour, open it up for questions, Q&A, group discussion. I think one of the most valuable aspects of these fireside chats is the peer-to-peer learning and hearing from other folks like yourselves who are small woodland owners, sharing your experience and anecdotes. As we go through the first half of the event this evening, if any questions arise, feel free to put those into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And when the first half hour presentation is done, we'll take a look at those questions, screen those first before we open up the event to a back and forth group discussion. So with those formalities out of the way, I'm really excited about tonight because it's actually an opportunity for a couple of us at NNRG to talk about ourselves. I'm grateful to be joined by my good friend and the executive director of the Northwest Natural Resource Group, Seth Zuckerman. And as you may know, we both, Seth and I, co-authored a book recently called A Forest of Your Own, and was just officially released on April 1st. You can actually find it in bookstores, which I find to be kind of a novel experience. Thanks, Lee. There it is. Partly in focus.
Right. It's hard when you have your screen blurred. I'll hold up this one so you all can see.
So say, hopefully the clarity of the writing is a little better than that. This is an absolute pleasure to work with Seth on this book. And so we're going to talk a little bit about our experience writing this book. I'm going to have Seth introduce himself first and chat with you a little bit about what inspired him in this concept, because ultimately this was his big idea that he wrote me into, although I gladly played along. And then Seth is going to read from the book. I'm going to chat a little bit about some of my inspiration behind this book as well, do a reading from the book. And then he and I are going to chat back and forth a little bit and give you some of the kind of background and context for the book that we just wrote. So with that as a sort of loose agenda for the next half hour, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Seth Zuckerman, again, the Executive Director, Northwest Natural Resource Group, and the progenitor of this big idea for this book. So, Seth, I guess just as I alluded to, tell us what your impetus was, your inspiration for writing this book, or just for the concept in general. How did you come to scheme up such a wild idea like this?
Well, it's an idea that germinated during the pandemic, and we all had our own pandemic projects, right? There was sourdough, there were home improvement projects, there were garden projects, and then sometime in the winter of 2021, I just woke up and in the middle of the night, I think it was, and I thought, we've been doing ecological forestry at Northwest Natural Resource Group for over 20 years. We should really make available what we've learned and to a broader audience than just the people who come to our workshops or the landowners that we work with one-on-one. And I thought we should write a book. And I immediately tried to enlist Kirk in this crazy project. I will. And I'll let him talk later about how that project landed for him. But as we were developing the project, part of our pitch to the Mountaineers, which was kind enough to take on this project with us, was that this would be a book that could do for forestry what How to Grow More Vegetables, a book that came out in the 70s or 80s for organic gardening, a book that would tell people, that would inspire people to want to take on the stewardship of a forest, and would give them some pointers about how to do it themselves. And so that was I guess that was the impetus, or the kernel of what we started with. And then we had to, then put clothes or flesh on those bones, once we got a little, came to our, by cold hard light of morning, decided this is something we wanted to delve into a little bit more. Do you want to, I don't know, do you want to ask me anything more about that, Kirk, or
No, it's great. I think with that, I think really what is at the heart of your inspiration that I've come to learn anyway is what you've embedded in the introduction to the book. And I'd be inclined to turn it back over to you and have you do a reading if you're so inclined.
All right. Well, this is I don't know, just a little bit from the introduction, that also kind of encapsulates it is actually the first part of the book that I wrote. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but you kind of think about something that you need to write, you put off writing it, you imagine what it might be like, but you don't have an idea where to start. And then I just pretty much sat down and wrote the gist of this. And of course, it's been edited and massaged since then, but this is where we began. I cut my teeth in forestry during the late 1980s and 90s, the time known on the West Coast for the timber wars. Hardly more than a century after lumberjacks first arrived in the region, it had become inescapably clear that timber harvest was decimating the few remaining ancient forests. Environmental activists raised the alarm. Apart from small preserves in state and national parks, the grandeur of Western forests was at risk, along with the habitat they provided for creatures ranging from spotted owls to steelhead trout and slender salamanders. On the other side of this concern for old-growth forests, loggers and mill workers saw a threat to their livelihoods, and the forest industry sensed a threat to its bottom line. Battle lines were drawn. You could see the conflict in any town on the coast, from Fort Bragg, California to Bellingham, Washington, expressed in a counterpoint of bumper stickers, a clenched fist shouting, "Earth first" on a Subaru station wagon, and "Earth first, we'll log the other planets later" on a Ford F-150. The wittiest ones always seem to come from the logging side. "Spotted owl tastes like chicken," and my personal favorite, "Hug a logger, you'll never go back to trees." But among the wide selection of slogans, I never found one that resonated with me enough to put it on my own car. Trees are a renewable resource and can provide the raw materials for roofs over our heads and chairs under our butts, with much less environmental impact than steel, concrete, or plastic. And yet, the old-growth forests were irreplaceable on any human timescale. I could walk among these towering trees and feel both small and at peace, moved in a way that transcended what I felt when I hiked through a meadow or a younger forest. To cut the last of these magnificent forests was to waste a legacy that our generation had been put temporarily in charge of. So, how to distinguish good, thoughtful logging from rapacious liquidation of our natural heritage? I wanted to make clear that I understood the need to harvest some timber, but I also appreciated the other jobs a tree can do besides becoming a 2x4. The answer I came up with, which I wrote out in block letters on a sheet of waterproof paper and taped onto the back of my VW Bug, was cut trees, not forests. In a sense, the work I've done in forestry ever since has been an exploration of how to translate that idea into action. And I really can't imagine a better place to be doing that than at Northwest Natural Resource Group, which is really trying to explore the how-to as well as the why to of that question. And I can't imagine a better person to have been doing it with since I joined NNRG in 2017 than Kirk Hanson. So, Kirk, I'm going to toss it to you and ask you, what did you feel when I suggested this idea that we try to bring everything that we've been doing, all these strands, and try to weave them together into a book?
Well, I think my response, and this is my response to most of the big ideas that you bring to our organization or to me was, absolutely, let's do it. I found that you are a generator of great ideas, just a superb human being to work with. So I would be hard pressed to decline, I think, any offer that you come up with. That being said, the opportunity to write a book, was and still is, it's been a lifetime passion of mine. Of course, I thought it would be the next great American novel, but a book on ecological forestry is really the next best thing as far as I'm concerned. And so, I'd like to think that, Seth, being an accomplished writer, myself at least being a writing enthusiast, that we wove some literary value into this book. I think rather than just striving to, or rather than writing a technical manual, a handbook, I think Seth and I both were striving to write something that would be very open and accessible, to a broad range of readers. And I'd say that was, probably my main mission behind this, was to take this, evolving art and science of ecological forestry and package it up into a book that would be accessible to the layperson, whether they are a forest owner and manager, or what I would consider a forest enthusiast, somebody who loves forests, maybe has a relationship with a city park or state forest lands, national forests, and that this book would help inform, their voice when they're talking about forest conservation. I think the other element that inspired me was to give people hope and a vision that there is another path to forestry than just the industrial model of short rotation plantation management on one end, or just preservation, lock the gate and walk away on the other end, that there is a middle path to forestry that can produce timber and valuable forest products, as well as conserve, a wide range of ecosystem services. But, as with any idea, there is a sort of pre-existing inspiration to that, or something that came before that idea that inspired it. And similar to Seth, I'll read the beginning of chapter 2, which is my first chapter in the book, and this really gets at sort of my, I guess, the existential wind in my sails, as I'll put it. I grew up in a very different environment than the one I've lived and worked in for the past 30 years. I was born in Minnesota in a belt of hardwood forests that stretch across the Midwest states, a forest composed of red and white oak, sugar maple, birch, and the occasional pine. Although my family lived on the outer rind of the suburbs of the Twin Cities, we also owned 80 acres of forest land in the St. Croix River Valley, a couple hours farther north. Over the first 20 years of my life, my family frequently traveled to the woods, as we called it, and tinkered with the hardwood forest. My parents were of the Aldo Leopold School of Conservation. If you're a careful steward of the land will support you. They spent countless days planting white pine in the understory of the second generation hardwoods, protecting the seedlings from deer browse, and eventually thinning the oaks and maples to make way for the return of the pine as it gradually eclipsed the forest canopy. We cut endless cords of firewood from the diseased red oak as it slowly expired to a root fungus that was epidemic throughout the forest. We filled water jugs from natural springs that seeped through the porous, sandy soils. Not being hunters ourselves, our dad leased the annual hunting rights to our property for the value of the annual land taxes. We cross-country skied, hiked, camped, picnicked, played, and developed an awe and appreciation for nature. Later, my dad took oak logs to a local mill and had them turned into lumber from which he made various items, including a set of heirloom quality craftsman style living room furniture for my family. White pine was the original old growth across much of the Midwest before it was logged off to feed a growing nation, a prelude to the future of forests in the Pacific Northwest. Before my parents sold a conservation easement on their land to the Minnesota Land Trust, the crowns of the white pine they had planted for decades were just beginning to emerge from the canopy of hardwoods, effectively restoring this original old-growth species to their plot of land. My parents eventually sold the family forest to another private owner when they moved west to live near me and reinvested in forest land near Black Diamond, Washington. When I moved west more than 25 years ago, it felt like an existential imperative that I acquire my own forest land into which I could send down roots, make sense of this world, and pursue the endless fascination of tinkering in the woods. In 1995, my sweetie and I purchased our first tract of land, what I now refer to as our homestead property near Oakville, Washington. I had just enough college tuition money left over after graduating to make the down payment on the land, something unheard of today. Like a forced savings plan, we put every spare penny we earned into paying it off. Our Oakville forest sits at the northern terminus of the Willapa Hills, a massive series of ancient submarine clay ripples. If you scramble down the deeply incised seasonal stream drainages on the north side of the hills, you will find a horizon of sedimentary soil choked with seashells, evidence of the era when these antediluvian marine terraces were submerged beneath salt water. Over eons of subduction, the Juan de Fuca plate ground its way beneath the North American plate, shoving the current shoreline up out of the ocean, exposing the marine terraces and setting into motion the ecological succession that led to some of the most biomass-dense forests our planet has ever known, second only to the redwood forests of Northern California. The old growth is long gone. My family's Black Diamond and Oakville forests, and a third forest we recently purchased near Bucota, Washington, now support a third generation of trees, composed largely of young Douglas fir and red oak. Ghosts of the former old growth still linger in the shadows of our woods in the form of massive stumps and down logs, but these have nearly faded to nothingness and require a keen eye to find. Restoring the structure, habitat, and character of the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest is one of my family's missions, and in so doing, we will generate periodic dividend checks by thinning trees from the 200-acre forest investment we've made. However, to quote a common saying in the world of restoration ecology, the desired future condition is not the past. My family is not endeavoring to manage our forest back to a historical condition. Instead, by looking to historical and current old-growth forests as examples, we're using principles of ecological forestry to manage our forests forward into a new climate that may not support the same assemblages of plant species that existed historically, and forward into a condition that we hope will provide a sustained supply of high-quality forest products and a rich panoply of ecosystem services, such as wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. Well, that should give you both a little flavor of where Seth and I are coming from, and initially what inspired us both on this pathway of being advocates for ecological forestry, and then ultimately, embedding and articulating that philosophy in the book that we just wrote. Pivoting a little bit from what initially inspired this book, I want to turn back to you, Seth, and it took. How about you to talk a little bit about the timeline of writing the book, and then what was what was one of the things that you learned during this kind of long process of pulling the book together? What was something that, yeah, that you discovered, in researching this subject matter?
Mhm. Well, we can really divide the time up into 3 years, right? A year of hatching and refining the proposal and working out the details with the Mountaineers, a year to write it, which we really pretty much compressed into the last 3 or 4 months primarily, and submitting the manuscript in February of 2023, and then another year of editing and pulling together all the photos, the captions, the maps, and so on, until it finally arrived back from the printers last month. Um, I think it's a great question. What did we learn? Because of course, if all you were doing in a book is putting down the things you already knew, it would be a pretty boring process, right? So that process of discovery is really essential to keeping the writing process alive. And for me, it had a lot to do with fire. One of the, actually, it's sort of interesting. Early on, in the whole process with Mountaineers, um, the timetable involved us submitting the first 20% of the book, um, as for them to sort of see how the proposal was translating into an actual manuscript. And at that time, we didn't try to meld our writing styles together. We just said, here's some chapters that Seth wrote, here's some chapters that Kirk wrote. And after they kicked it around and their editorial staff, they decided we should really try to keep our voices separate because they were, this is true also in our work together, compatible but distinct. And so, it made it a lot easier than going forward to divide up what we did. And we each just had chapters that we were drafting, and we'd read each other's work, of course, but it was on each of us to do both the research and to translate it into actual prose. So when it comes to wildfire, I had previously lived in California, where we had a different approach to how you deal with wildfire. There's ways in a drier climate to reduce the risk that a small fire will get big. And in fact, where you want to have repeated, it's natural for fire to come through on a fairly regular basis. And then I kept finding that people here were thinking about it differently. And so what I came to learn is that there's this notion of different fire regimes where, and I don't know if, let's see, let me see if I can share. Maybe you'd have to, I don't, Laura, would you be able to give me the power to share an image here? I'll just throw it up
You
here on the
should be able
screen.
to. Is it letting you?
Um, not, oh yeah, here we go. Let's see. All right. This map is a map of different fire regimes in Oregon and Washington. And the red bits are what's known as a high frequency, low severity fire regime, where it's common for fires to come through and they can burn along the ground and not restart the forest from scratch over again. Whereas the darker green bits, those are ones that are low frequency, high severity fire. So what's common there is for the forest to not burn for 200 to 500 years. And then when it does, boy, you'd better watch out. The lime color is mixed severity. And I guess way off in the far northeast, you'll see orange, which is higher frequency and high severity. So that's like the lodgepole pine, which burns more often. But here I am living in this dark green area, and I had to really re-examine my priors when it comes to fire, and think about how instead it would just be a fool's errand to try to remove fuel from the forest so that it wouldn't burn. Instead, we can try to reduce the risk that fire will escape from, say, people's homes or campfires into the woods and start that cycle over, which would start the forest over from scratch, because it's inconvenient for that to happen in our neighborhoods. Also, when you think about it on a landscape basis, right? There's a scarcity of older forest, like I was saying in the introduction. And so we want to keep the older and even the middle-aged forest on track to keep getting older so as to replace those older forests on the landscape. How about you, Kirk? What would you say was the biggest learning you had in the course of working on the book?
Well, I think what was probably both the most challenging chapter, at least initially, and where I got the most learning was the chapter on forest health, where I started out doing a lot of research into insect pests that affect forests in the Pacific Northwest and fungal pathogens. And definitely had more familiarity with several common fungal pathogens, laminated root rot being the most ubiquitous, red ring rot. But I realized that now that I was kind of faced with the task of writing a chapter on forest health that also dealt with insect pests, that I had very little experience actually dealing with or managing for insects. And that struck me, I guess, as a little bit odd. First of all, being a forestry consultant for practically 30 years, not knowing anything about the insects that can be detrimental to forests seemed like a huge gap in my knowledge. But that also, revealed to me, at least in Western Washington, where I focus most of my work, that insects have a very little impact, at least on the goals and objectives of the type of forest owners that I work with. So there really was never a cause to learn that much more about them. So I jumped into the chapter, thinking, okay, I'm actually going to write, an encyclopedia on insect pests and pathogens, but within the context of ecological forestry. And pretty soon that this chapter, became thousands and thousands of words, multiple pages, and I couldn't figure out how to condense it down into something that, we obviously had a word count limit in this book, and each chapter then, it had to be limited to a specific number of words. And I realized I'd never be able to do justice, to the topic in this limited book. So I had to kind of back off and really, look a little more broad scale at this whole notion of forest health and couch it in terms of ecological forestry. And that those terms are that, for those of us that, again, are managing primarily for ecosystem services, insects and fungal pathogens can be as much allies in our management as they can be a detriment. Fungal pathogens obviously kill trees, as do many of these insects, creating then snags, dead trees, down logs that are important for wildlife habitat. So they introduce structural complexity into forests. All the things that we are doing as forest managers, mechanically or manually, some of these natural agents are doing already. So what I tried to weave into the book was more of a observation of these disturbance agents, these mortality agents, and kind of coaching and understanding of where do they fit in your within your goals and objectives, and again, are they allies or are they actually detrimental? So that was a fun chapter to work through. Seth, I think kind of getting towards a little bit the tail end of our conversation here. What what is a key takeaway or a couple takeaways that you're hoping people will get from this book when they read it? If you could distill your your message down to one or two comments. You're muted.
one hopes that after 20 or 30 years, when one's wisdom has evolved a little bit beyond what I put on my VW Bug. And so here's what I've come up with. Um, as just if I had to boil the whole book down to a single sentence, is that what you leave is more important than what you take. And so if you come to the forest with the attitude of, I'm just going to focus on the things that I can take from the forest, that's not going to set the forest on a path towards restoration or recovery or healing or increased complexity. But if you ask yourself, at the end of this stewardship action, what shape am I going to leave the forest in? That's a whole different frame of mind, a whole different way of thinking that sets the stage for you to become an ally in the forest's recovery. And so I think I'll just leave it there. And I know we're getting on past 8 o'clock, and so we're over halfway through our time together. We should probably throw it open for questions. And I don't know if there's any in the chat, but if not, people can raise hands and jump in. Or Kirk, is there anything you'd like to say by way of summary?
Well, I'll come back to that. I mean, I like the idea of opening it up here to folks as well. So, this is for you, everyone here, this is an opportunity. You can certainly ask any questions, to Seth and I about the book, but also more broadly, just, the topic of ecological forestry. We're more than happy to transcend the little content between the covers of our book. But if you've got some general questions about ecological forest management, we're happy to go anywhere people want to go. And I see Suzanne has her hand up. Go ahead if you can unmute. And Laura, does everybody have the power to unmute?
They should, yeah. Let's see. It's not giving me the option, but there we go.
Oh, okay.
Got
Hi. So we'd like to thank you for this wonderful fireside talk tonight. And we were just, really taken by the complexity really of your knowledge and understanding and passion for keeping the forest alive and intelligent, responsible action. And I'm just wondering, Seth, you talked about, the area in which you live, which is green on that map. And what kinds of undertakings do your communities do in order to protect? And I don't know, are you working together or, yeah, if you could talk a little bit about where you are.
Right. So I live on Vashon Island in the middle of Puget Sound. And I think, it's a community of about 11,000 people on 30 some square miles. So a lot of people on 1 to 5 or 10 acre homesteads, surrounded by forest. And so I'd say that here people are acutely sensitive to the risk that a wildfire would pose, just to our, all of to our human community and our homes, our infrastructure. And so really it's not so much that we're undertaking forest management together as when I lived in Northern California, we would have programs where we created fuel breaks so that a fire could be stopped. But here I think what we're really trying to do is cultivate greater awareness of being fire safe, particularly at those times when the forest is really dry and when there's a risk of starting a fire in bad weather conditions like a dry east wind that could really spread it quickly.
Right. So, I mean, just visually, just an observation. Both of you have fireplaces behind you, and you live in this very fire sensitive region. Um,
How do you
yeah,
manage it?
yeah. How you're how do you manage that?
Uh, Fortunately,
It-
we're at a time of year where it's
It's
extremely unlikely. A spark wouldn't stand a chance in the woods right now.
yeah, yeah.
But we
Anyways,
wouldn't be doing that
interesting to
we
see
wouldn't be
both
doing that
at
in
the
August.
fireside and the topic, and yeah,
We're from Montreal, and we live in a big city, and we're out in the east, and mostly deciduous forest, I guess. And but we have a beautiful mountain, or a butte in the middle of the city, so that gives us a lot of forest right in
yeah,
the city. So we're very lucky that way in
very.
Montreal. And
We
so,
love our
anyways,
forest.
yeah. So thank you
Yeah.
for everything.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Bonsoir.
Michael Cummins, I see you've got your hand up also. If you're able to unmute, I'd love to hear from you. Michael, are you there? Well, maybe while he's working on his technology, we can pivot to somebody else. Anybody else have questions or anecdotes that they care to share uh, in the realm of ecological forestry? Or has anybody else even, written a book or written an essay that's, approximates this topic? I'd be curious to hear from you. Anything to contribute to the subject matter?
Well, my name is Lee, and I'll say something. I live out in the Cape George area and got a few acres that I bought about 25 years ago or more with a lot of trees on it. And I always wanted to grow trees because I went to a lot of botanical gardens throughout parts of the world, and I realized there was a lot of people who are really into trees and growing trees and really specialized in trees. And I met an Australian that his whole thing was growing mahogany trees in Southeast Asia. And I met expatriate Yanks that are down in the West Indies taking coconut trees and planting them and just getting into really growing trees. And I thought that sounded like something I'd like to do. So I came back out after sailing for a lot of years in Polynesia with the idea to buy some land and grow trees. Well, I bought some land, but it already had trees on it. But I'm growing redwoods and sequoias and Japanese cedars and having a lot of fun with it. So when you guys started talking about stewardship of the land, that started speaking to me about things. And then what you said, Seth, about what you leave is more important than what you take. And I like that idea because what you leave is your connection with it, and being one with the forest. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about forest fires, because out here in Port Townsend, East Jefferson County, we don't have so much of a fire risk. But in the summertime, when it's dry, you can never be too sure because things can happen. And, a car can pull up on a piece of grass and all of a sudden the heat of the car or a muffler, tall grass gets there and starts to burn. I mean, things can happen so spontaneously that, wow, something's happening with fire-wise before you even know it. So it's always in the back of our mind. So I'm totally a student of forestry, but trying to learn from it, and I took a master gardening program because I wanted to learn more about the earth and soils and growing. I'm an old sailor who's trying to reinvent himself into a gardener and a tree grower guy. So when I met you two, I started thinking, this is interesting, these guys, about how to manage a small piece of forest. I'm not a big forest guy and owning a lot of property, but I got a lot of trees, lots of madrona and firs and cedars, and I love the trees. And biggest ones probably about 16
Your
inch
connection's
diameter,
getting a little thin here.
and
Starting to,
got lots of them.
oh,
Okay, hard to hear me.
yep.
Okay.
We may have to come back to you here in a little bit. The connection's getting a little iffy.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Hey, Lorna, I see that your hand is up. Smith. Going once.
I wonder if, is it Lorna?
I think I have it now.
There we go.
Yeah.
There you are.
I think I have it now. I want to just thank you so much for this thing that's so close to my heart. And I got the privilege of living on this farm where my husband and I are living since 1953. And so I've seen the flooding, I've seen the growth and cutting of timber, I've seen so many things. And I'm still trying to figure out a way to take it with me when we get done, when you're talking about the long term. But the idea of stewardship is like so close to my heart. And I just thank you so much. And I look forward to the EQIP program and some of the things hopefully we'll be able to do together. Another thing that happened when I was when COVID happened, I actually studied art and I do watercolor and that kind of thing. But when COVID happened, I knew some people, some related, who were very ill, and I thought, what can I share with them that that would be good? And what ended up happening, I thought, well, I'll do 2 or 3 months of little tales of the trail. Well, it took me 2 years to write these to get the whole trail, and now I'm doing country moments. And it's not the same as you guys because I'm not doing so much technical stuff about it. But what's happening is I have about 80 people I write to. It's kind of like a column in a way now. But my English instructor from Centralia College from way back is a fan. And anyway, it's been a way for me to cherish and love and to know nature more. But in my hope, it's bringing some of this stuff to people who are glued to technology and don't have a firm grip on what's around us and what the chemical pesticides and the the continuous places for animals to live and I just hope through some of this to make it like you're talking about more to the people so that they understand how critical it is. Because see, the other thing is like for me, we're like a farm. If you have 100 cows that you can make the hay and raise and all that, and then suddenly you put 200 cows in there, it's not going to work. And that's kind of what we're doing to the earth. And so I just appreciate your work so much. Thank you so much.
I received your periodic email blogs, I guess we could call them, musings, and they're wonderful. I hope you're seeing everyone. I think there is a publishable moment in your future. So thank you, Lorna, for what you're doing to share your experiences in the woods, and hopefully that'll inspire other people also to write about their own. Lee Jimerson, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi there. Yeah, I think I'm off mute. Yeah, quick question is, do you dream or foresee this becoming a textbook somewhere like at Oregon State? Reason why I mentioned, I just went to a luncheon today where Jeff Murphy, the president of Oregon State, was there, and I talked with her a little bit about the School of Forestry, or this whatever they're calling it today, School of Natural Resources. And when I graduated from Oregon State, I only took 3 forestry classes because they were just sort of teaching monoculture forestry. And 35, 40 years later, they're better, but I'd love to see someone teach a class like this and to have that offered. And is, if you need any help or if you have any ends, do you foresee this being able to be a textbook for some of our up and coming foresters?
Well, yeah, I certainly hope it does make it into colleges. I think that's one of what was one of the intents behind this book, and I hope that Seth and I did this well, that we both made it, readable and accessible to the layperson, but there also is a lot of technical information in there. In particular, when we get into the sections on silviculture, there's a lot of instructive information there for how to measure trees, measure tree volumes, measure density, get out some of the metrics in a forest that you need to collect in order to understand them, what your management actions are. So, I think it could be very complementary to a college course. In fact, a few years ago, of course, right in the middle of COVID, I had the opportunity to become an adjunct professor or teacher rather at Evergreen State College here in Olympia and teach a quarter of ecological forestry. And of course, wish I had this book at that time. I think teaching that course and pulling all of that material together was antecedent to writing this book. I don't think it was quite on our radar, at least mine at that time, but certainly provided a good fodder for it. But yeah, Seth, do you have something to contribute to that question?
Well, I think, at the right level, I think it could be a great book in a college context. Of course, we drew a lot of inspiration from Jerry Franklin, Norm Johnson, and Deborah Johnson's book, Ecological Forestry. And Jerry was kind enough to write the foreword for our book. And I think since your time at OSU, which I know has probably only been about 5 or 10 years, Lee, there's been some, I think, some broadening of their curriculum. And, we've worked with, there's even a professor who has a chair in alternative silviculture. So I think there's, the world is changing as well around us. And these ideas definitely might find a home there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Anybody else have a question or comment, anecdote they care to share? If not, I think if Seth, if you're willing and amenable, I would love for you to read your afterword. I think that's a kind of an apt conclusion to our evening, is just as apt of a conclusion is to our book.
All right. Well, thanks. I'll do that. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. And this is a little excerpt from the afterword. Ecological forestry is more than just a way to grow timber and build a private trail network for you and your friends. When you step back to take in the bigger picture, it is a way to engage with nature and restore a connection that has been weakened over centuries of modern industrial civilization and postmodern digital distraction. Through the last half-century, this drive has taken many forms. Backyard gardeners have stuck their hands in the soil and turned the compost in an effort to, quote, make the earth say beans instead of grass, in the words of Thoreau. River restorationists have learned about their watersheds and worked to make them hospitable to salmon again. We happen to feel drawn to forests, and that's why we have made them our entry point to this practice of reestablishing a right relationship with nature. A connection with nature cannot be had in the abstract, nor can it be had with the totality of nature, or at least we confess that we are not enlightened enough to pull that off. Rather, it occurs in a specific place through actions of reciprocal caretaking. My mentor in watershed restoration, Freeman House, used to say before partaking of a salmon that its presence on our plates was a sign that we are still welcome on the planet. You could say the same about a chanterelle, the delicious fruiting body of a fungus that grows in partnership with a stand of trees, or even about a 2x4. These all emerged from the earth in forests that have been shaped by human management. So they are in some way the fruit of our stewardship, however neglectful, misguided, or careless our efforts have been. Whether through intention or accident, finesse or blunder, we have made the earth say mushroom or timber instead of grass. These gifts of the forest are what we draw from that relationship. As in any reciprocal relationship, the question is, what do we render in return? Ecological forestry offers this answer. mindful stewardship of the forest, taking account of all its parts. That's the principle. All else is commentary. The details will no doubt change and evolve as attentive forest stewards learn more about how the life forms of the forest interact with one another and their biophysical setting. In a decade or two, some of what we've recommended here may turn out to be mistaken, overgeneralized, or too prescriptive, but we are confident that the fundamental principle will still endure.
Thanks, Seth. Well, thank you again all for joining us. For those of you that hopefully we have intrigued, if you don't yet have a copy of the book and are interested in acquiring one, certainly, first of all, go down to your local bookstore. If they don't have it, then you have a great question for them. Definitely acquire it.
Or of course, you can go, if you want a little pointer about where to find it, if you go online to our website at nnrg.org/book, then you could, there's any number of links that will take you to your favorite bookseller.
And believe it or not, this is a surprise to me, but it's available on Amazon. When I took a look at it on Amazon, apparently it's #1 in the topic of tree gardening, which I didn't even realize was a thing. So there we are, #1 in tree gardening. Anyway, good times. So, hey Seth, thanks again for this opportunity to collaborate with you. It's been a joy, and now we get the fun task of going on book tour with a nonfiction book, which is interesting. And we've had a couple so far behind us, one in Seattle, one in Port Townsend. We've got a few other places we're going. Those locations are on our website also. So if you do go there, depending on where you live, we're heading on to Portland in a couple of weeks. We've got an event here in Olympia as well, another one up in Bellingham. We'd love to see any of you in person if any of those locations are in close proximity to. So once again, thanks for joining us for our monthly fireside chat. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, if there is a topic about small woodlands management or ecological forestry that you'd like us to cover during a future fireside chat, feel free to email me, call me, let me know. We'd be happy to take that into consideration because we have no idea what we're going to do next month. So we'll either figure that out between now and then, or you will inspire us with the topic. So until next month, thanks again for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at a future fireside chat.
All right. Good night.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.